Welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Join us here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first. Neil Rogers runs a very successful marketing business, and he gained all of the knowledge he needed for success in what some might consider an unlikely place. It's the title of his book, Bar Tips. Everything I needed to know in sales, I learned behind the bar. After almost 30 years of success, Neil, what made you share your secret now?
I started during COVID. I had always written like little ditties and that type of stuff, but never wanted to tackle a book. But I had some pieces that I pieced together to start this one. We had a birthday party for one of the guys we worked with at this place called the Full Sail, which was my first bar job, and it was a very emotional evening. You know, we were kids when we were doing. I was 19 years old when I started working there. So this marvelous night, I just wrote a whole thing on the experience and how we felt back then and what it took to be part of it, and then I had also written about where that bar is a summer place where we summered every year. So I wrote about that. So I had those couple pieces for the first couple of chapters, and then because I discovered that my hospitality roots had a real effect on my sales career. So I had that piece, and then I had the premise. The premise is that I never left bartending. I've been bartending on the road for 30 some odd years.
You probably learned so much about all of the people who came in and ordered drinks from you. Weren't you their psychiatrist, best friend? Yeah,
I mean, everybody wants to know the bartender, right?
Correct.
So one of the big messages for people to glean out of it is work on your listening skills, right? So that, especially if you're going to be a salesperson. And that's what a bartender does. They listen to how your day went, what you're interested in. So it's kind of what you do when you're on the road selling. And I always tell people, and it's an old adage, 2 ears, 1 mouth, using in that proportion. I do a lot of practicing on it now. I make sure that when I go somewhere, I always sit at the bar or at the counter, and I engage people, and I let them tell their story.
Well, just looking at someone and making them feel like they're heard. Mm-hmm. So many people just want to be heard. Mm-hmm. And they just go through, they don't feel like anybody really understands how they feel or why they feel the way they feel or why they do what they do. And if you're able to give them a nod and encouragement and make them feel like, I really care about what you're saying to me, I think that goes a really long way. I really do. So, how do you lay out your book? I mean, it's not like tip number 1. I mean, it's wrapped up in a story?
Well, there's stories on each tip. So the first couple of chapters is that kind of memoirish piece, right? So one of the things I wanted to get across to the reader is that you have innate skills. In the first couple of chapters, I'm appealing to the average student. I joke when I speak on the topic. I say my combined SAT scores and my class rank have one thing in common. They were both in the triple digits. So my academic prowess, my academic intelligence wasn't as strong as my interpersonal intelligence, but I had intelligence. It's just different types of intelligence, according to Howard Gardner, in the frames of mind, right? Okay. Musical intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence. Now, I didn't know that back then, but in retrospect, it all makes sense. I mean, I was never going to be an engineer, never going to be a doctor.
Right.
It's going to be a sales guy. I found that when I served people as a bartender, I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the feedback. I enjoyed making them happy. I enjoyed the whole process of it. I enjoyed introducing them to other people that like-minded. Maybe they get along. Maybe they'd like to play a game of darts. Yeah. Whatever that would be. Right. So again, so I had those pieces. And then I just started laying out what were the important things as being a bartender that are akin to being a salesperson, a good salesperson. How you say hello, the importance of the proper greeting. Being organized, the most organized wins. Time management, how do you manage your time? Are you on time? Are you one of those people that's always fashionably late? That's not going to fly in the sales world. And you're going to always be behind the 8 ball. If you show up at your bar job and you get 2 or 3 other people back behind the bar, and you showed up late, they got to cover you.
Right.
So you're leaving your team. What's your attitude? What is your aptitude? How do you look? What's your appearance? Is an important chapter. Product knowledge. How do you know your products? And by the way, are you snowing them if you don't know your products? If you don't know, find out and get back to them. And then peripheral knowledge, that when you walk out of a hotel and you ask the doorman, where can I get a good steak?
Right.
That's peripheral knowledge.
I see. Yeah.
That's very important. And then we do a chapter on the armchair psychologist, which really gets into listening.
Do you do it like, take so-and-so, for instance, he was doing blah, 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 and this happened. Do you tell a story with each tip?
Yes. Okay. Taking ownership when a business problem arises.
Okay.
Right? So I talk about how I came up with that, where that came from. It came from a mentor when I was in the food business, when I sold from a food distributor into restaurants and hotels and whatnot.
Okay.
And he was kind of a wiseacre kind of guy, top to the tree sales guy. And the stack ranking is always 1 or 2 in the company. He befriended me and mentored me a little bit. And one of the things he said to me, he says, Neil, whenever anything goes wrong, start with yourself. What was my role in this? How could have I done better? What can I do to have so this doesn't happen again? So as the story, one of the stories that goes with that is a woman came up to the bar and ordered a vodka martini extra dry. So Dennis, my buddy, made her a vodka martini, extra dry like he always did. Up with a twist. Here you go. Here's your drink. Took a sip out of it. She goes, it's not dry enough. Now, Dennis comes over to me and he just kind of whispers in my ear, and he says, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never put a drop of vermouth in a martini. Can't be any drier, right? But what he does is he goes and grabs a mixing glass, puts it down in front of the woman, pours it right in front of her, puts the twist in there. She takes a sip out of it, and she goes, that's the one. So what's the lesson to be learned there? You could have gotten a beef. Said, no, I never put vermouth in a martini.
Right.
I haven't done that in 15.
Right.
You could have told him all the things he told me.
Right.
You know what? He decided I'm throwing out 2 ounces of booze and I'm making this woman.
Yep. So true. So true. I relate to this. I was a waitress like through college and after college. And I always said to myself, boy, if my career doesn't work out, I'm going back to waitressing. I absolutely loved it. And I loved every person I met and I loved serving them. And I could screw up. I mean, I was delivering a vegetable tray and I tripped and it went all over the table and the people sitting there, and they laughed and they didn't give me a hard time at all because they were regulars. They knew who I was. And it's all in the way. You're so right. It's all in the way you handle it. But we all have this desire to hang on and say, I know what's right here. Like, it's very hard, don't you think, for people to say, all right, the martini's not dry enough. All right. It's hard for some people to say, I'll just pour it out and make another one because they want to be right. They don't want to let go.
Oh, you're going to love this.
What?
One of the quotes I have, what's my quote? Being right is overrated.
Yes.
That's in that chapter. Don't be pushing your rightness on anybody.
Put your rightness away.
Doesn't work.
So do you do sales training or something, Neil?
I've mentored kids,
Okay.
mentored people. I mentored people that were like me, didn't have a strong academic background. I became a very good student, by the way, but I figured it out. I had to learn how I learned.
Yes.
But we have built a workbook to go along with the book. So we're going to be doing sales meetings and that type of thing. So yes, the answer is yes. That's going to be a big focus for 2024.
Sounds like a great sales tool, like trying to put your team together. Will you go out and do that for other companies?
Yep, that's the plan. I've got I think 2 or 3 sales meetings lined up right now. I knew in the back of my mind this is what I wanted to do. I mean, I'm 65 years old. I've got something to say. I've got a track record, and now I've got it in print, and I want to say it.
Well, good for you. Best of luck. Are you going to do a follow-up to this?
I don't know. I think the next book we would probably write here in the Rogers household is one that has to do with our special needs son and our journey with that. We very much use the same process that we use in bar tips. I mean, it's just the same stuff. of using our interpersonal skills to move things along and make things better for them. So it's matter of fact, one of the friend of mine said to me this summer, he read the book and he goes, Neil, I really love the book. And is that how you did the other stuff too? I said, yep.
That's great.
That's how I created the Special Needs Education Foundation. I also started the first of its kind special needs classroom at the community college here in town.
That's great. Good for you.
So, yeah.
Giving back.
So, yeah.
Real pleasure to meet you, Neil.
No worries.
An RN for 23 years, Leo Storm has made a big difference in many lives, and it paved the way for the publication of his first book entitled 6 Visits on Saturday.
Yes, I was in 2007. I worked for a hospice agency, and I was an after hours and weekend on-call nurse, and I handled basically any problem that would come up after hours and on the weekends. And so part of that was death pronouncements as well. So that's kind of like the book is about that day and about how, it started out. My first call was at 6:00. It was a death pronouncement. And as the day went on, they just came in one right after the other. And after about 22 hours, I'd pronounced 6 people dead.
Had you ever done that before?
I had pronounced a lot of people during the 4 years that I was there, somewhere maybe a little north of 170 people, but never 6 people in one day. It had been 1 or 2 maybe was the most, and 6 people in one day. You're dealing with 6 different families, 6 different sets of, maybe religions and things like that. So, I had to shift gears all day long, just trying to keep in the game and, and stay focused. It was a hectic day, but it was a day that I think I can go back and pinpoint that I learned a lot about not just life and death, but I learned a lot about myself on that day, I think.
How do you tell this story?
Kind of starts out, give a little bit of background about how I got into the nursing profession. Then from there, it just kind of dives right into the story, starting with the very first person that I pronounced, and then it goes on from there. Some of the chapters, there were interesting things and wonderful things about each of the people that I pronounced, and the families tell you all about their loved one. You feel like you kind of knew them, even if you didn't. And so I just went from one death pronouncement to the next, and some of those would delve off into other stories, other memories that I had during my career as a nurse, not necessarily in hospice, but might have been somewhere else that I worked. My second pronouncement was a lady, and during her life, it was all about singing. She sang everywhere she went, in the church, in the choir, at home, everywhere. So during the course of that visit, it kind of brought me back to a little boy that I took care of in a pediatric. He had just come out of the bone marrow transplant unit and had battled leukemia. He sang every day. He kept his little tape recorder, and it had an orange microphone attached to it, and he sang all day long. And so I kind of go back and kind of recount that story about how that kind of affected me, and it affected me in a very profound way. I felt close to that little boy my whole life, and I've written about him several times. One of my guest columnist pieces was about him, but it makes you feel a little bit sad when you lose them. We wound up losing him, and for me, that case I think left a lot of unresolved feelings for me about death. It brought out, a little bit of anger, some resentment. You ask yourself why all the time, especially when it involves children. My youngest one that I lost was 6 months old, so I had a lot of feelings that came out, especially when I worked with the kids. It was just a why, and it left me it left me with a lot of thoughts and feelings about death that I'd never really thought through. It always came with the job. I mean, every day you deal with death, but I think the six people that I dealt with that day really made me start thinking about it, almost to the point to where it became an obsession. I would think about it all the time, and you would wonder, about your own life, when you would die. It brought out a lot of feelings like those, and so I think I felt good about writing this because if I had those kind of feelings, I thought maybe there's probably somebody else out there that has gone through the same thing.
How old was this little boy that had such a profound impact on you?
I met him when he was 3, and he passed away whenever he was 5. But this kid sang, he sang all country music, and he had all these songs memorized, and you heard them so much that you memorized them yourself after a little while. So he had a profound effect on me as far as it was so many great memories we had with him, and it made every day that he sang, it always, even if it was a bad day, it turned into a good day. You know what I mean?
I don't even know how you deal, being a nurse, you deal with death all the time, but it doesn't sound to me that you're immune to it. Like, how do you deal with the families? How do you keep it together?
It's one of the things you learn early on in your career. You learn, I guess, how to keep your own emotions and your own feelings in check, and you're just focused on, the matter in front of you. And, you're always expected to kind of know what to say and know what to do. And so you kind of have to repress a lot of those feelings. There were a lot of nurses that would have to pull out of a case for a little while and go to the bathroom and cry, or just whatever they had to do. But it's one of the things you learned early on is you've got to be the one, be kind of the rock, so to speak. And that's just pretty much how you get through your day. If you have to go home and cry, write about it, whatever, that's just something you do when you're not on the job.
These 6 visits on a Saturday, were they people of all ages? Were they people that were expected to die? Were they all in hospice?
They were all in hospice. I think the youngest one was like 48. And my oldest one was around, I'd say 91. So with hospice, you basically qualify for it if 2 doctors agree that you have less than 6 months to live. So they were all people that had, illnesses that were inevitably going to lead to their death.
What's your biggest question about death or fear?
I don't think it's fear anymore. I think it's what's it going to be like after? Where do we go? Do we go anywhere? It's that unknown. So I think that's always been something in the back of my mind. I have set of beliefs that I kind of follow, so I kind of feel like I know where I'm going. But when it comes right down to it, you always have that question in the back of your mind. Is there something after we live? So that was, for me, that was probably the first and foremost question in my mind.
And in terms of your readers, what do you hope to leave them with?
Well, I think that the readers that I hope to attract to it are adults, anyone that's been touched by death and have been left with some unresolved feelings because of it. Even throughout the course of that day, there was so many feelings and stuff through the families that I picked up on. There were some people that were angry, and there, guilt, and it was all, I picked up on different sets of emotions for every single family that I dealt with that day. So, I hope that adults who read it, and I hope that they are able to learn something a little bit more than just life and death. I'm hoping that they maybe learn some things about themselves that they weren't really aware of before they read.
You going to keep writing? You still taking notes?
I am. I've actually, I'm working on one right now. I'm about 4.5 chapters in. It's called Peacekeeper. And this book was about one single day. But like I said, I kept notes for all those years. So I decided to pick 10 different situations, encounters, however you want to say it, and write about those 10 different things. So that would be something that was more spread out through the whole course of my career. I just felt like after I wrote this one, it was something I needed to get out of my system, but I had a little bit more to say about some of the stuff that I dealt with during my career. I always knew from day one as a nurse, I always knew that I would write a book someday. I just didn't think it would take me this long.
Yeah, right. Leo, this is good stuff, man. You got me thinking.
Right. You got to think about it. But I took a pen name because, it was a true story. And so I renamed all my people. I actually used colors for their last names. And so it was something, because it was a true story, I wanted to make sure that, that nothing ever got out, or, it was able to be identified in any kind of way.
So you don't want the people that you worked with in the hospital that you were at to know that you wrote this book?
I would rather that they not know. It's just one of those things that from the very outset, I felt like I had to keep a lid on the true identity, number one, of the people that are in the story, but also on myself as well. So that has presented a challenge. I won't lie.
Yeah, that definitely. You're going to have to go out of town.
Right. I'm going to have to put on my sunglasses and wear my cap backwards.
Leo, I'm really glad I tracked you down. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. I thank you.
Roger N. Messer has had a very successful career as a personal injury lawyer in Florida, but this isn't a book about money. It's about the people he was able to help and the difference he was able to make that inspired his book, Tort Wars.
I've always wanted to write a book. In high school, my high school senior English teacher told me, Roger, you're a good writer. You could make a living as a writer. I didn't know how you could do that. I was a very poor kid. And I went to law school eventually and did very well doing that. So I don't know. I was really inspired by some of my clients, and the stories I have are pretty interesting. And my wife's tired of hearing my war stories. And when I get together with other attorneys of like ilk, we talk. And I've been encouraged by a couple of them to write a book. And about 10 years ago, I started with this one. And I finished the first chapter, the first story. They're actually not chapters, they're stories. By far, it's about the best one in the book. I think it's the most meaningful case I ever handled. And I finished that draft of that one, and I showed it to him, and he read it, and he told me it was very good. I need to finish it. And I started, and then I got about a third of the way through, because I would do one, and then I would have a case to try and prepare for, and I'd put it aside. And I'd do another one, the same thing. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I got really busy, and I put the whole thing aside and forgot it. The pandemic came, and they locked the courthouse for 2 years.
Oh.
And I had a time to finish. Once I started writing, it flowed pretty easily, really. The only good thing for me that came out of the pandemic was it gave me time to finish my book.
Tell me this.
It's 25 distinct. It's like short stories.
Okay.
Some of them aren't so short. The whole book is 440 pages long, 444 pages, I think.
Wow, that's a lot of book.
And it's a lot of book. I actually had to chop it off. I had ideas for about another 6 or 8 books, but wrote some notes on some of those, and there's still some interesting ones out there. But I mean, at some point you got to stop. I think I could have written 2 books real easily.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I don't know how it's going to do. It's when I finished the first draft, I was looking for a place to finish, and suddenly I had a real awesome case that it was the death case, and it resulted in my biggest verdict. That was in 2019. It was like a $10 million verdict.
Wow.
And it was the death of a young girl who was 18 years old, was already a college junior, brilliant, beautiful girl, She was driving her dad's brand new F-350 pickup truck. She lived in the country with her father, west of Fort Pierce, and she and her best friend were riding into town towards Fort Pierce in the evening. It was 7 o'clock at night, 7:30 in February, so it was dark. And she was doing 63 and a 65 according to her GPS when she took her foot off the accelerator 1 second before the two girls died. They hit a Prevost motor home going the wrong way at night with all the lights off, being driven by a 99-year-old man.
Oh, Jesus.
What else could go wrong in this picture, right? There's other stuff too. The guy had lost his license earlier for a mental problem, and his two of his no good children helped him get his license back, and they cheated to do it. And he'd had his license back 23 days before he killed these girls. He lived in Michigan. He was having a vacation with his girlfriend down here when the thing happened. And he had a gold digger girlfriend in the Prevost with him. She was the only survivor of the accident. We sued her too, and settled her part of the case for $1 million before trial. Okay, so I mean that was a pretty interesting story, and we got a bigger verdict than the insurance, and then we went to Michigan and busted the guy's trust. It took a long time. It wasn't that ended because COVID broke also a lot of the courthouses in Michigan, so it was like until COVID was over, we didn't really finish.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff in there. One thing that inspired me to write the book early on was a lady, her name was Doris Trofe, and she asked me to put her name in the book. And Doris is a lady from Vero Beach, Florida, which is up the highway a little ways. And her daughter was killed by a drunk driver back in 1981 when I was just a really young lawyer. I mean, I hadn't been practicing very long at all. And the guy was a foreign student from Venezuela. He was learning to be a pilot at that school up in Vero Beach where they trained all the
9/11 hijackers, all the
Saudi Arabian people that flew the planes into the World Trade Center.
Yep.
Because that place was famous for training foreign students who had money. Mm-hmm. Okay, so anyway, that's how that one started. But she came to my office. She wanted help adopting her two grandchildren. And she said she didn't know how she was going to feed them because her husband had a heart attack and was being retired from the post office. This lady was a telephone operator and had been told that within a year she was going to lose her job because of automation. And she said, we don't know how to feed them, and it went from there. The guy had no coverage, no insurance. You have to read the book to tell, we got $1 million from a couple of places. Back in 81, that was a ton of money. And it was, it's how we got there is kind of interesting. I say I've always been a very small law firm. I never had more than 2 or 3 lawyers in the law firm wherever I was working.
So this woman was able to raise her grandchildren.
Oh, yeah. And she also went on to become the state president of the MADD. And she went to Tallahassee on a regular basis and lobbied to have the law changed from legal limit for alcoholic blood sugar from 1.0 to down to 0.08. And she succeeded ultimately, but it was a long struggle. The things she did, and looking at her determination, she's only referred me at least probably over the years 10 or 12 cases, a couple of them for 7 figures. I mean, this lady was in fact, after the book was published, I, of course, bought her. I've had several meals with her. I bought her lunch and gave her a signed hardback. So, that's the third story in the book, and her story is pretty interesting.
Well, it's nice to hear that, it's not just about winning a ton of money.
It's all about the people. The whole thing is not about the money. It's about the people.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's not about criminal law, except there's a lot of crimes in the book. We represented victims. There was one attempted murder case in the book. I call it attempted murder. And the kid that committed the crime was 16 and was treated like a juvenile. He was, he slapped on the wrist. But it was bad. But my client in that case was a 19-year-old kid who graduated from high school the year before and was going to college. And his friends that were 18 had just graduated from Fort Pierce Central High School, and he was invited to a graduation party out west in the country, west of Fort Pierce. Had some kid lived out there, and they were maybe 50 kids in the crowd there. They were standing around. Someone in the middle was talking. They were all middling around. And this one kid who was not invited to the party drove up in his car, left the motor running, and got out and sneaked up behind the crowd and decided he would try to set a nunchucks on somebody he didn't know. And he hit my client in the head with nunchucks and fractured his skull. And then took off running, got in his car, took off, and the other kids were chasing him, and they wrote the tag number down, and less than an hour later, the police were at the guy's house, and the car was still warm, and the bloody nunchucks were on the seat. That story it has a good ending. Most of my stories have good endings. Over my career, I probably won 90%, and I've handled a bunch. I don't mention any of the losses. I've only had a few, but I remember them all. But I try to learn from any time. Any lawyer that tells you he's never lost a case,
right,
has never tried very many.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just the way it is. But it's there's a lot of human interest. It teaches a lot. If they look at it, it'll teach a lot of people about what their rights are, and their rights are under attack right now. By the way, in fact, between the time I finished and the time the book got published, the book was published in April. In March, the Florida legislature went and changed the law to make it worse. We got a horrible legislature right now.
It sounds like a great book for a law student.
Well, it would be. You know something? I was down at the Miami International Book Fair, and at least half of what I sold were to law students or to lawyers.
Yeah.
Including 2 lawyers on a firm that I've beaten a couple of times, a big defense firm. But I had an interesting discussion with a tort professor from the University of Miami, and I'm supposed to go down and talk to her class. We're trying to get the time worked out for that. They're on winter break right now, but I also expect to get a speaking engagement over at my law school. I've had some discussions regarding that. That hasn't been set yet, but it's really not so much for lawyers, although a lawyer would like it. I have a good friend of mine that's an attorney up in Melbourne, Florida, and he bought 25, which he is mailing to his legal friends all over the country.
That's great.
He's a top lawyer. He's a big guy, good guy. That's what it's about. It's about the civil jury and civil trial process. All the cases didn't result in trials. I'd say half of them in the book were settlements, and the other half were probably trials that happened.
Right.
I've had about 150 civil jury trials over a career of 46 years, 47 years.
That's great.
That's not that many a year. It's 2 or 3 a year.
Right.
Back in the old days, before we had mandatory mediation, one year I had 11 trials.
That's a lot.
Okay. Nowadays, 2 is a lot. 2 or 3 is a lot nowadays.
It's true. It's true.
But the old days, it was, when they settled, oftentimes it was the morning you started the trial.
Yeah. Yep.
So no, it's
didn't drag out.
I never advertised. I've never been on television. I've never been on the radio. I've never had a billboard. I just made it on word of mouth and results.
And doing a good job. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you. Have a real good day.
You too. I found Ralph Peluso on his back porch lamenting a flooded golf course in Delaware. An accountant with a sense of humor. He got an MBA in finance, worked on Wall Street, then telecommunications, and he served as the literary editor for a monthly D.C. metro area newspaper. Now, he's been exposed to some very interesting people and situations, which served as the juice he squeezed for his book, Backstories, Skeletons, and Dirty Laundry.
I wrote my first book back in 2004, and I finished it in 2009, and it was based on the life and career of Babe Ruth. I'd get up early in the morning and just start writing and write for a few hours and then go to work. And I wrote a couple of short story books, and I tried to get them published, but a lot of publishers didn't want to touch short stories for some reason. I don't know why. One day, the situation happened here in the community between couples, and I said, I have an idea for a story, and that's when I wrote Backstories. I actually wrote that in 2 weeks.
Skeletons and Dirty Laundry. Well, I think everybody's lived in a town where there's shenanigans going on.
Yeah.
What kind of shenanigans we talking about? We exchanging keys in a bowl?
It should have been that simple. There was a husband and wife, that couple of kids, married at least 40, 45 years. And then there was a same-sex gender relationship, two women that had been in that relationship for about 37 years. And the wife and one of the partners took off. They shook the community, broke up the marriage. They went off into the sunset. The husband went back to Pennsylvania.
Oh.
And the second partner still lives here, I guess. But that led to, a lot of consternation and thought. And then I sat back and said, you know what? There's a lot of truth to that, because even in most families, it's not what people tell you. Oftentimes, it's what they hide. That's where the stories lies. And that's when I sat down and decided to put a novel together and came up with the concept of backstories.
When I read your synopsis here, I was like, wow, serial killer, con artist, dominatrix. I wonder if any of this is true. Like, well, what did you have to draw on?
Yes, things like that. Look, the best of fiction is something happened where you've saw inside your life that you've put down on paper and created it into something else, right? I say, Shakespeare said the world is a stage, and I tell people that every day there's an act out there. You just have to look for it. And so a lot of the bits and pieces and details inside of backstories is actually things that I've come across in my life. I'll tell you how I got the dominatrix thing. I was in my teens pumping gas and working, while I was going to college. And there was a fellow, a little older. He's in his late 20s, early 30s, I guess. I think, if I remember correctly, his name was Otto, and he lived at the Y in New Rochelle, of course. You're a kid, naive. You don't know why people do that. And he was the captain of the Y softball team.
Oh, jeez.
So he said, "Do you want to come play with us? We go around and play Ys up all over the Westchester area, because the Y was in New Rochelle." And I said, "Sure, I'll play." And one time we were driving up in his car, and he was telling me, he asked me a question. He said, "What's your thoughts on B&D?" And I said, "What the hell is B&D?" So he says, "Well, you ever hear of S&M?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, B&D is just a lighter version. It's bondage and discipline." I said, "Oh, no idea." So then he gave me a tutorial on what that meant. I go like, okay, no, it doesn't sound like anything. So kind of everybody, I'm sitting here, here's this guy who's, a happy-go-lucky, free spirit, and he's into bondage and discipline, but that stuck with me a long time. So that's kind of where the domination things entered into my mind to put it into a story. I mean, I think everybody keeps a history of all the odd things they've run into in their life. If they ever sat down, they could, you have to draw from something to create a story. There's a couple of main characters, but the real main character is Tommy McDonald, and he's McDowell, I'm sorry. And he is obviously the patriarch of the family. Nice guy, perfect family, giving, always gives to the church, always does this on Sunday, but never has time for his family because he wants to make sure that they're financially secure going forward. He wants to give them everything they've got. And in his absence, the vacuum that he created, led his wife and children to all secretly grow apart. The children remained close, but they weren't honest with each other either. And his wife is a central character because she's a victim or potential victim. He meets a female bodybuilder who was a dominatrix along the way, and she's a central character. And then you've got a cast of other characters. You've got the triplets, one of which is a con artist, one of which is a serial killer, and one of which comes in late to the game. That's really the dim bulb in the trio of the triplets. So with this, you get captured in the first scene because the wife is getting ready for a date. She hasn't dated in 30 years, and she met this guy through a dating application. As most people do, they don't go hang out in bars. They go on, one of the 8,000 dating apps in the internet. But this guy's got strange request. He wants her to dress up in a costume, with a mask, and he's going to come dressed as a fox.
Nice.
Because he's a furry, but it also hides his identity. And he convinced her that she needs to do this because this is the way people can be real, because no one knows who they are. And they wouldn't reveal themselves until after the third date. So you get captured in that first thing, like, what the hell's going on here? And, she reflects that was, 2 or 3 years from her divorce. So that's kind of sets the stage. And he turns out to be, he's a serial killer.
Oh my gosh.
But she doesn't know it at the time. So you kind of get pulled in. And I find that the read actually appeals more to female readers than it does to male readers. I found that the people who do read it, after getting into that, they generally finish inside of 2 days.
Jeez. Okay, so who's reading your book? Are you doing book signings in the town where this stuff was going on?
Yeah, I did a book signing in Alexandria. I'm going to do one here in Bridgeville. But see, the whole thing is, although it's based upon that was kind of the thing that kickstarted the process, but you wouldn't know from the book that it's because of an incident here.
Okay.
Right? That just got me going. So, look at that family. Everybody thought they were perfect. The two female partners have been going together for 37 years, no problem. This husband and wife, happily married together for 45 years, no problem. And all of a sudden they disappear on each other.
Yeah.
There's a lot under that surface that we don't know about.
Right.
That's what kickstarted the writing process. The setting is in Boca Raton, Florida.
Okay.
And, one of the reasons I picked that, I needed a place with a small police department with very little violent sexual crimes.
Yeah.
Because, this way that's what the serial killer, where he targeted his victims because he would fly under the radar screen.
Right. And he could, because it was in a town where nobody would think that was even possible, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Nice. Do you wind it up in this book, or is there a sequel?
There's always a sequel because, I was thinking about keeping the detective character Ralston and actually bridging him into another novel.
Well, thank you so much for making yourself available for me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate your time.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. We hope to see you back here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first.